Hi everyone, and thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage. You know, one of the first videos I posted, and one of my most successful videos to date, or most watched, is the restoration video of the 1969 Mustang. Now I want to keep that video up because it's such a great video and people like it, but unfortunately the YouTube copyright police caught up with me. I had some music in the background and they're going to pull the video. So I had to redo the video, but I made it a little bit longer, put in some more pictures, and I have a little bit better narration, so hopefully I can answer some more questions as I go along. So this is just a repost of my 1969 Mustang Coupe restoration video. Hope you enjoy. To start out with, the car had many problems. As you can see here, the motor mounts were ripped, and it originally came with a 6-cylinder 250, but we were going to put this 351 Cleveland in it, so this would be the new power plant for that. You can see that the engine needed to be rebuilt. There was a lot of carbon on the valves. It was pretty beat up. Even though it had some new valve springs on it, it really needed to be rebuilt. So it was torn down, and a lot of the parts were redone to give them a little performance edge. The bottom was pretty clean. There wasn't many issues on the bottom of the engine when I took it apart, but there were other parts that showed significant wear and a little bit of neglect. You can see the pistons were pretty dark, so it was running rich for a great long period of time. Some of the other parts that were bad were the water neck. Some of the drain back lines were pretty dirty. You can see here this water neck was rusted right on, had to be cut out and redone. The camshaft was wearing a little uneven. It did have some wear, and it didn't look the greatest, so that had to be replaced. And you can see here that the cam bearings were galled, which means that coolant got in there somehow and galled that bearing. The cylinder bores were in pretty good shape, except for one spot. It appears that something broke free and took a chunk out of one of the bores. You can also see that the rings were not seated completely straight. And I found this spring somewhere in the bottom of the engine. I don't know where it came from, but there was a lot of parts that were put together kind of weird. This rag was just stuffed in as a plug, which was kind of strange. And again, here you can see that the motor mounts were ripped. The shocks back in the underneath, saw a lot of interference between the exhaust and the shock tower. And the bottom was in pretty good shape. So I decided to keep most of that. None of it had to be replaced. Once I got the engine out, you can see the engine compartment was fairly dirty. Pulling everything apart, there was a lot of metal work that needed to be done. The shock towers were leaning in a little bit, so they had to be welded up. And you can see the car originally came, it was black. It was painted fairly poorly, and a lot of the bodywork was very, very poor. So I started pulling apart the entire body, taking apart all the fenders, pulling it down to the subframe, and repairing all the rust on the inside, where the metal was ripping, around the shock towers where it usually happens, and getting most of the front end in good shape, cleaning it up, trying to get it painted so I could get it in a relatively decent shape to get the motor back in. There were significant parts, significant wear on a lot of the suspension parts, so they were replaced. And you can see that the front end, it was pretty straight. It was in fairly decent shape, so it didn't need a ton of straightening, but some of it did need to be replaced. He wanted to reuse the transmission, so I had to reuse that with the stock manifold that he had, or the manifold that came with the carb and the engine. Here's the block, all machined, ready to be put together. It's a 351 Cleveland, and I had limited space to work on this one. I was working in a small spot, but I certainly got the job done. The crank, I had to grind some of the oil holes because they weren't chamfered well enough, so I had to work on that a little bit. Here's the engine being put together. This is the bottom end. That lined up pretty good. I rotated very freely. Put new pistons in, a nice performance piston to replace that with a roller timing chain. I still have the eccentric in there for the fuel pump because I went with the mechanical fuel pump. And here's the head gasket starting to go together, keeping the engine all blue, trying to maintain the authenticity of the motor, all blue with the black bullies. So I kept that. and it went together really well. It came out really nice. It was a pretty good looking engine just for a stock 351 Cleveland going into a Mustang. One thing, you can see that copper line going from the high pressure line where the oil pressure gauge is, and that copper line goes to the back of the block because Clevelands are known for lack of oil to the back bearing. That's why that's there. The engine compartment came out pretty nice. It went with the matte black to finish the engine compartment, and in order to handle some of the torque, I put this wire around the motor mount, and that acted as a kind of a grip to hold the motor mount together. It originally came with power steering with the bump steer end on the control arm there, so I had to change it. I had to change the end to the female end to go on the power steering or the non-power steering linkage. Here's the non-power steering arm from the gearbox, so that had to be changed to accommodate that. The part on the left was what the clutch throwout pin looked like, and it was really pretty poor, so I replaced it with that spherical rod end, and here's the engine going in. I was really excited to get this running, so I wanted to get it running. Turning to the body, there was typical Mustang rot all over around the windshield, specifically above the upper windshield, right and left side, right where the pillar post comes together. Someone did some Bondo work there, and a lot of silicone, did a really poor job. So this is where I started to look at the body and look at what really needed to be fixed and what I was up against, what parts I had to get, what I was going to replace, and what I was going to try and salvage. A lot of the lines for the body did not line up very well. They were a lot of Bondo, a lot of peeling there, so I was anxious to get all the paint stripped off and get underneath it and see what I was going to have to be replacing. When I pulled back the drip rail, I found some of this material, and the vehicle was originally Landau, so it had a Landau roof on it. So here's the repair. I started to weld in a lot of steel, and I finished the welding with lead, and also finished the upper pillar there with lead as it came from the factory, so there was no Bondo anywhere around any of the water openings around the windshield, so it would be a permanent fix with the lead. I did both sides the same way. I did the driver's side and the passenger side, put some metal in there, fabricated it, welded it in, and then finished it with lead to make sure that it would last forever, and then it came out very well. To seal it in, I used a metal etching primer. Wanted to make sure that none of this would leak, and I always use a metal etch primer when I do a repair like this to make sure that there's a good adhesion between the paint and bare metal. That's critical. You can see how both sides came out, and they both came out very well. Before I put the windshield in, I had to paint the windshield opening, so I put the color on as a 1969 Calypso Coral. That's what color the car was going to be, or I painted the car, so I painted the windshield opening that color so I could get the windshield in. Then I turned my attention to the rest of the body. I ground off the paint off the quarters, and the left rear quarter was in very bad shape. It was sectioned together. Someone had repaired it one time and put in this piece, and that was pretty poor. There was a lot of rot around the front of the wheel opening. That's something I didn't want to fix, so I decided I was going to go with new quarters for this car. There was some rivets in there to the trunk floor, which was very poor, not a very good fix. And if you look down the side here, you can see how it was just beat up, really not worth fixing at all. The roof was equally as bad. Looks like someone really took a ball-peen hammer to it, or golf balls landed on it, because it was really beat up. So here's the holes in the side. That would be where the trim piece went for the Landau. You can see I'm starting to cut the quarter panel out here. And once I did that, I saw the outer wheel well needed to be replaced, so I got new parts for that. I wanted to replace those. The upper part, right around where the drip rail was also in pretty bad shape. A lot of rot and holes around there. And here's a better picture of the roof. You can see all the dents in there. I have no idea what caused that. Someone did some previous body work, and it was absolutely terrible. I had to cut all that out of there. Grind it down and repair it on that side. On the passenger side, the driver's side was in pretty good shape. I just had to grind it down and fix some of the poor body work. And here's a close-up of the drip rail area. You can see the small rust holes, and that's a typical rot spot for Mustangs on the bottom, around the top, around the corner, and right up on the top. So here I had to start looking towards the quarter panel. I wanted to cut that out and
get down to replacing the quarter panels to make sure the body was straight. Once I knew what I had to do, I made a list, got all the parts, and then started cutting. A lot of the seams that were original were broken, re-welded. Someone brazed it, did a really bad job. But once I got the roof fixed and I wanted to get it sealed up so I didn't have bare metal sitting there, I primed the roof with the metal etch primer just to protect it while I was doing the rest of the work. And here you can see the quarter panel. I'm starting to cut that out. I got the outer wheel well cut out. I'm starting to cut down, and I want to take out the axle, but I wanted to leave the axle in there to make sure that everything was centered around the axle, so I left that in. Here's the new outer wheel well put in, just clamped in place before I welded it. And then before I put the quarter panel on, I had to fix the door jamb there. You can see there was a lot of rot, so I had to weld and lead a lot of that shut. So it was like back to original. It came out excellent. I was really happy with that. So here's a quarter panel in place with some Cleco pins. It's something I stitch along, go with a stitch weld, and then I countersink the weld, and then I finish the weld with lead. When you look inside the trunk, you can see how there was a patch panel put in. Someone did a lot of riveting there, and I had to cut it all the way up to the ridge line. That's where the quarter panel was going to replace to. So I put a weld bead right along the top there, cut it down, and then I bent it so that the new quarter panel would be put in place. The rocker panels were in pretty good shape, but the outer wheel well was going to be replaced there. And the passenger side, that door jamb was not in very bad shape, so I could leave that. It only needed a minor amount of repair. The back part was not too bad. It lined up okay, but still needed some work. When I cleaned up, I could see that some of the parts were replaced. Someone did some welding on it, but I had to do the same thing on the passenger side. Cut out the outer wheel well, cut the quarter panel all the way up to the ridge line, and then get it all lined up. I put the ornaments on to make sure all the body lines were perfect. Getting those body line perfects is very important, and you can see here where someone put a little patch panel in around the taillight, and I had to fix that, cut that out, and redo that. The customer wanted to get rid of the side ornaments, so I filled those in with a metal patch and welded. I welded in the metal patch, but then filled it in with lead. The doors were also in fairly rough shape. They both needed new skins on, and when I took them apart, they were rusted on the inside, so those had to be sandblasted. And the inner part, the lower part of the door, was in rough shape, so I had to fabricate some steel parts to redo this part of the door. The door was really rusted out, so I made new pieces of metal, welded them in, leaded it in place, and it looked just like a brand new door when I got done with it. Both doors were pretty much the same shape, but once I got done with the inner door, I put the skin on, and the doors came out beautiful. Then once I got them primed, I could put them on, mounted it to the car, got them lined up, got all the body lines perfect, make sure those were right on both sides, and then I started to work on the passenger side. Got the outer wheel well put in place, cut it, bent the metal for the quarter panel, put that in place, made sure everything lined up just perfectly. Everything was straight all the way up to the front of the car. Of course, the door jamb has to line up right. That weld has to look right when you open the door so you don't see the seam. And the same thing here, countersinking the weld and filling it in with lead. And it was a beautiful repair. Here's the door again. The other door had the same problem, rust on the inside. Had to reskin that door, the passenger door, and here's where I started to put everything together to line it up. Passenger side was in the roughest shape, so I had to use some Bondo there just to get it perfect because it had to look perfect. The body lines came out very well. The door needed minimal repair, but here's the same thing on the passenger side. You see I put a patch in there, welded it in place, and then filled it in with lead. And once it was filled in with lead, it was virtually a seamless repair, like the ornament was never even there. Pretty good idea. I like that. So I'm working forward. You can see the car is primed now with the metal etch primer, starting to get that fixed. Now I can look at the hood. The hood needed to be sandblasted inside and out, top and bottom, all around. It was in pretty rough shape once I got the metal cleaned off. And someone had the idea to cut holes in the hood for a hood-mounted tack and something else. I think they had an oil pressure gauge in there, but I had to fix those up. So I had to put some metal in, weld metal in there, and fix those to close up those holes to get the hood back in shape. But it did not need a ton of work. Here's the hood. put on. I was starting to line up the body and getting the hood perfectly straight before I put the fenders on. And the fenders were kind of rough shape. The bottom parts were like Swiss cheese, so I cleaned it up, welded them up, and then filled them in with lead. And again, that was a beautiful repair because it'll last forever, and it was just a flawless repair. Passenger side wasn't an accident, little crinkle there, so I had to fix that before I could prime it. But preliminarily, I mounted everything to the vehicle, or mounted it to the car, just to make sure that everything was going to line up perfect. So I was fixing everything, and it was going along as planned. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see some black marks, like Sharpie markers around, and then when I take the vehicle out in the sun, I look for spots that need to be fixed before I continue. So as I'm putting things on, the body line lines up, and I can fix things as I go along to make sure everything is perfect. It's just like fix a part, put it back on, make sure it's perfect, and then do it over and over and over again to make sure that every part I put on is perfect and matches up exactly the way I want it to. Then I switched and went into paint mode. I had to get a coat, a nice couple coats of a primer surfacer on there. And once I had the primer surfacer on there, I could go through the entire vehicle with a fine-tooth comb, start to sand it to get it perfectly smooth. The trunk was also in rough shape, so that had to be stripped down to bare metal. And once I got it stripped and painted with the splatter coat, it looked just like an original trunk coming right out of the factory. Put the trunk back in and looked great, or the gas tank. Now I'm getting ready to paint. Got everything painted down, sanded down to 600 grit sandpaper. And I like to paint all the parts at once, so you mix the paint once and you don't have any variations in shades. So I try and hang up all the parts, and I paint all the parts at once. And it all starts with a bright white base coat. This is a base coat, clear coat system. I use the DuPont Chroma base. So everything was painted first coat with a bright white. That was really going to make that orange color pop. 2 coats of the white just to get it even all the way around on all the parts. I saw 2 coats of white, and then I laid down 3 coats of the Calypso Coral Orange, and that is a real wild color. It went on like it was just like glass. It was beautiful just even in the base coat. All the parts got 3 coats of a base coat, and made sure that they were all coated evenly, and even the ornaments around the front headlights, the rear trim parts, and I put on 3 coats of clear wet sanding in between. And here's what it looked like when I started to polish it. It looked like glass. That color was gorgeous. I sit it outside, and it really, really looked awesome. These are the doors just right after painting, and they looked awesome. Didn't need much work, but I still sanded and polished those, just like the fenders. And here the fenders are painted on the inside with undercoating, polished on the outside, ready to be put on the vehicle. Here it is all assembled, almost all assembled, at least the doors, the fenders, getting everything lined up perfectly, making sure it's ready to go. And then I had to start doing some of the blackouts. The customer wanted a blackout on the back, so I used a semi-gloss flattened black in the back, and that looked really cool. You can see how that orange is really an awesome color. It really does look good compared with in contrast with the black. The engine compartment came out gorgeous. It was beautiful restoration on that engine compartment. I really like that. And I did the hood the same way. He wanted a decal on the front, but I still painted that. That's actually a painted semi-gloss black, along with the trunk lid. You can see I did some with the trunk lid, try and match it the way it was. He wanted some boss stripes on there, but it wasn't a boss, so I kind of designed my own boss stripe. And this is what it looked like when I took it off. It was really pretty cool. There's a lot of thin lines in there, but pretty unique boss stripe for this car. It kind of accents it well. And the hood was done the same way. The hood scoop was functional, so I painted all that and matched it all up. Here's all the trim parts being put on, blackened out in the headlights. The front valence put on, blackened out. When I put the glass in, I sandblasted the bottom of the glass so that when I glued it in the track, it wouldn't come out. Those are known for coming out. And here's a finished vehicle, ready to go back to the customer. 351 Cleveland, 4-barrel. It was really fast. It looked gorgeous. It ran awesome. And it took a long time, but you can see it was well worth it. I see this vehicle all the time, and it still looks as good as the day I finished it. Awesome, awesome looking car. So there is the new and improved 1969 Mustang restoration video. I did that vehicle about 13, 14 years ago, and it still looks as good as the day I finished it. The guy brings it by every once in a while, and he wants to do some more work with it. So I might cut the roof off, make a coupe out of it, so stay tuned. I appreciate you stopping by. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching.